All right, good evening. We are starting the SilmFilm project script discussion, Season 1, Episode 3. We're going to be dealing with the origin story of Melkor today. So far, we've discussed the Lindale, we've discussed the creation of Arda, and now we're going back into the void, back before Arda was created, to talk about where Melkor came from. Mm-hmm. So the big question to me to start off with is what exactly we're doing in the frame here. One thing, Marie's here, awesome. One thing that we had kind of left off with last week was having Glorfindel possibly walk in on the lesson as Elrond is about to explain why there's evil in the world. Why there's evil in the world if the Valar are all getting along. You know, the Valar were struggling initially to figure out how to work together. They finally got that figured out, and so why is there bad stuff now? And Glorfindel walks in and interrupts the lesson. Nope, we lost your video. Interrupts the lesson because he's afraid that Elrond's going to start going really, really dark to a 10-year-old.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's where we're picking up from, I believe.
Yeah.
Hi, Marie.
Hello. I have to admit I was not a huge fan of the Glorfindel interruption side bit.
I was not. It's not a horrible idea. And I feel like that episode could have ended without any difficulty whatsoever. Although it does bring into question if we spend any amount of time in the frame, there has to be some kind of conflict for this episode.
Right. And I think it was important to somehow bring up that Melkor is a word that nobody ever says. Like it's that level of ban. Like the worst of worst words.
Right.
So if we have to work that in somehow, Give
me 1 second. I'm going to grab my headphones because you're really quiet. 1 second.
Hello.
I don't know where I was going. They're right in the pocket.
Can you see Marie?
I can. Can you not?
I cannot.
Oh, I can see you.
I'm going to refresh my page.
Okay.
And we'll see what happens. Okay?
All right. If not, I'll refresh mine. But
I'll be right back, hopefully.
Okay. So, we're kind of back to the... All right. So the question becomes, how much time are we going to spend in the frame in this episode? If we're not going to spend a lot of time in the frame, it doesn't really matter that much.
Since this episode mostly takes place in like the void and the timeless halls, I think we need the frame just for some reality.
Right, yeah.
I mean, after this episode, we can start having very minimal frame, just like a brief introduction, story, brief wrap-up. Nothing really happens in the frame is okay. You know, like for episodes 4, 5, and 6, you know, like moving forward, the frame can all but disappear for a while. But not yet. At least in my opinion. We're still...
I tend to agree. So that means that we do have to have some kind of... We do need to have some kind of conflict happen.
Okay.
During episode 3's frame.
Yes. Now, at some point, we need to bring up the issue of Estelle learning how to use a sword and fight and all that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And it's supposed to tie in with the actual story in some way, which means probably that's later when the lamps get destroyed or something. When actual conflict happens,
Mm-hmm.
the real story would be a more appropriate place for that, maybe.
Yeah.
But that's the only other temporary conflict that I recall being brought up by the host of something that needs to happen in the frame.
Okay. All right. I'm here. I promise. I swear I'm here. Okay. That's because she hasn't called back in yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. So are you suggesting then that we bring some kind of physical, practical training into the frame at this point, or do you want to save that for a little later on?
I kind of want to save it for later, but if in the absence of something else, or if we're going to decide that there's not time for that in the frame later, then work it in now. So I want it to happen well before the ramp up to the end of the last 5 episodes of the season. It has to happen well before that because it's such a small conflict. Nothing hinges on it. It needs to be a middle of the season conflict, not a
right. Yeah. Okay. Because I feel like at some point over the next few episodes, we're going to have to start to see Gilrine insist on some kind of practical education.
We can begin to set that up here because she can be a little bit mildly upset that the content of the lesson seems to be Melkor. Wait a second. Why are you teaching my 10-year-old boy about this evil take over the world kind of guy? What's the point of this again? So it said that she was going to get upset about the lesson, and this seems like the lesson to get upset about.
I agree. Also, keep in mind that among the Dunedain, I mean, granted, this is thousands of years ago, but thousands of years ago, they were worshiping Melkor on Numenor.
Right.
So it's even more to her. It's it's like he's telling the origin story of the devil. We have now completely lost Karita. Yeah.
I could see her and hear her before.
Oh, there she is. There she is.
Okay.
Okay. So we want so what we're suggesting is maybe it's not Glorfindel that objects to the lesson, but we're going to Gilrine objecting to the content of this particular lesson.
Right. There was a concern about introducing too many characters in the frame because this is already cast of thousands, and we're going to do Bilbo and the Dwarves later.
Yeah.
So
I feel like it would be a mistake to not give us at least a cameo to Glorfindel.
Right. And, I wouldn't mind making that cameo happen right about the time that the Balrogs take the lamps out, because
that's a good
Glorfindel and Balrogs kind of a thing.
Yes, yeah, that's a good point. I kind of like that, too. Yeah.
But at this point, we've introduced Elrond and Gilrine in the first one with Estelle, but and in the second one, we wanted to focus more on Estelle as himself, not being a pawn of adults. So we did a little bit more with that. Also introduced the Sons of Elrond. So we've got new characters. And Gilrine wasn't in it at all, actually, for the second one. So having her come back in the third one is important. We can't leave her out for 3 frames and then all of a sudden have her be important.
Right.
So.
Okay.
No, from that, I think we're ready for her. Another new character. It's like, are we going to introduce someone new in the frame every time?
Right.
Yeah. So that's where I feel like the sword fighting and Glorfindel should both wait for later.
I I tend to agree.
Which then brings up the point of what do we do now?
Right. Well, I feel like wow, my video is choppy. Maybe if I stay very still. Yeah. I feel like having Gilrine. Oh, awesome. Having Gilrine be the one who's objecting it's a good way to go. I feel like it starts to set up the antagonism between her and Elrond as more than just, hey, you're stealing my son from me. You know.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's more of an objection to content, and that's something where we can really emphasize her role as the mother who's concerned about making sure her son grows up into being a good, upright young man, kind of thing. Like it's a valid parental concern being expressed.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we have to make sure it doesn't sound like she's the mom who goes to the PTA and complains about like what the teachers are doing.
Every little thing, every time.
Right. Like, yeah. I want to object because I heard that in school they were doing this. Like, the last thing we want is for her to be like that. Yeah. So it has to be a valid concern, and it has to be expressed in a way that doesn't sound like, I'm a helicopter parent in the Middle Earth. That makes sense. You know? Like, it can't be like that. So we have to be a little careful with how we handle her objection and how she voices it.
Okay. Also, we need to figure out how we get out of that now.
You mean once she said it and Elrond's like, whatever, this is the lesson.
Right, yeah.
Because we're kind of going to tell the story of Melkor.
Right, yeah. Do we come back in to the frame in the middle to have that objection take place and then have it resolved? And then go back into the story?
I say yes, because like I said, this whole thing is in the void and the timeless halls until the very end. Right. So we need times to come back to like real places with buildings, trees and things because we need it. So interrupting with the frame in the middle of the story is not going to be bad for this episode.
Okay.
Whereas in future episodes, it'll be completely disruptive.
Yeah. Karita, just so you know, thank you. I was going to say, because you're there as if you were in the conversation, but you're not really there.
I cannot see or hear you.
Okay. So Karita says part of that will boil down to delivery as well. The same exact lines read in different tones will read either PTA helicopter mom or as a very reasonable and loving parent.
Exactly. This is direction and acting. It's not
right. Hey,
I can see you. Hi.
Hi.
I can hear you. Yes.
Okay. Awesome.
I can see and hear both of you.
Here we go.
We figured it out. It's awesome.
Okay.
Palantirs these days, I tell you.
So. The biggest issue then is going to be that we need to nail down right now is how does Elrond get her out of that?
I think that his response to her objection can be something along the lines of the people of Numenor didn't know what they were getting themselves into. They didn't know who Melkor really was, and that's why they fell the way they did. Had they known who he really was from the very beginning, they never would have gone that way. And he can say it like that, like, Estelle needs to know what this really is. If we hide this information from him, then how is that helping him make good choices later or something? You know, like, the argument of knowledge is better than ignorance.
Yeah, I feel like that's a good argument for him to make. Do we have Estelle kind of like stick up for himself at this point? Or are we not ready for that yet?
He probably would have had to have said or done something that clued her in that there was an issue with the lesson. So my guess is he's gone home and put his foot in his mouth about Melkor. like, so he could redeem himself at this juncture.
Okay.
I don't know how, but
This might be a question that is answered if I had been here for the last session, but how is young Estelle going to react to learning about Melkor and the corruption of evil? And is he going to be freaked out, or is he going to be combative in some way? He wants to go out and start killing bad guys right away. Like, how do you think he's going to react?
Well, let me ask you this. When you hear the story of the fall of Melkor during the beginning stages of the Silmarillion, how does that make you feel?
That's a good question.
Like,
when I first read the Silmarillion, I was pretty little when I read it the first time.
Okay, that's
so
perfect.
it was all very. You see where it's going right away. Just in the language of the story, it's obvious this is an important moment. This is a big thing that's happening, and it's
right.
An irretrievable step to fly in the face of the god character.
Right.
So there's some fingernail biting, but at the same time, you see right away where the story's going. It's not a cliffhanger of, oh, I wonder if he'll be redeemed. You just kind of know this is going to be the Satan character.
So the question then becomes, is it something that really freaks you out, or is it just something that is? Because it might be abstract enough to him that he doesn't really feel like there's this evil guy hanging up over his shoulder. Think about how you felt about, when you were a kid. I don't know how many times people told you about the devil, evil devil. I didn't really I had heard about this concept, and I grew up in a fairly religious home, but it didn't scare me. That didn't really have a lot of impact on me until I got older and started to really think it through, that there's some kind of evil spiritual power out there in the universe that could be in the same room with me, and I don't even know.
Yeah, like you probably wouldn't show the movie The Exorcist to a 10-year-old child. I mean, if you're a good parent. But at the same time, I think
as a kid, I got very introspective and kind of quiet and withdrawn when hearing about evil or things going terribly wrong. I got kind of quiet, and I had to do a lot of thinking about what the implications were. But I was that was my personality. So it kind of depends on what personality we think Estelle has and how he's going to react to this idea of grand evil on a scale that he can't really grasp.
Right. Well, and I think
that reaction that you have is probably similar to something we want to pull out in him, because what we know of him as an adult sounds like he is somebody who kind of sits around and thinks about things on his own.
Right.
I mean, so as a child, I could see him reacting in a similar way. And maybe that's where Gilrain notices something's wrong, is that he's very withdrawn and quiet. And she asked him, well, what's going on? And he's like, well, we were talking about the beginning of the world, and I realized that everything didn't work out so great, and there's problems. And I'm like, what are you telling my kid? Like, maybe even Melkor's name doesn't come up in that. And then when she finds out that it's Melkor, that's when she loses her, I'll just let Elrond be in charge here, and decides to.
Okay.
Yeah, and even just thinking later on, when we're going to have the adventures of young man Aragorn, he is kind of a guy that goes off wandering in woods and thinking and about old stories and songs a lot. So if we telegraph that when he's pretty little, I think that would be kind of, it would work. He's an active character, but
right. Well,
I don't know if it would be inappropriate.
Yeah.
So, again, do we have Estelle at the towards the end of when this second dip into the frame? Do we have Estelle wanting to know more? Wanting to wanting to delve deeper into this against the desires of his mother, or not?
Yeah.
Or do we have him be more passive in this episode concerning this?
I don't think we want him to be more passive. That's probably not the right note to hit.
Yeah, he doesn't seem like a passive character.
Right. Well,
But at the same time, do we want to put him in direct conflict with his mother over this issue?
right.
That's a separate issue.
I mean, the direction that we're leading Estelle towards is one of more self-direction.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And in the end, sorry, finish.
Yeah, go ahead. No.
I was just say, in the end, when he grows up, is it going to be that he's more Gilryan's child, or is he going to be more Elrond's child?
Mm.
Yeah.
And that's something that everyone involved is going to be very aware of if that shift happens. Yeah. If he goes from being her little boy to Elrond's pupil, that's going to be pretty significant. And it's totally something she'll throw in his face when he falls for Elrond's daughter. Like, this is all your fault. This is all your fault. Story.
You put these ideas in his head, telling him stories about people falling in love.
He wants an elf princess. Funny how that works. If you'd let me raise him as a normal human guy, we would have found him a nice Dunedain wife, and
and everybody would have been happy.
Down with a nice girl. It would have been fine.
Your daughter for all eternity now. Great job.
Yeah, an I told you so moment.
Yeah.
Perhaps. If ever there was one.
Yeah.
Okay. So we still have an open question.
Yes. I think Estelle should speak up and have an opinion and have a way to voice the value he's getting from the lessons. Up to this point, he hasn't really had to give feedback on the lessons, and this would be his chance to be like, well, this is what I'm learning. And he doesn't have to be like, shut up, Mom. Yeah. But he probably would speak for himself and be like, well, this is what I'm learning here. Is that good? Like, he can still ask her for approval.